Hello, John from the Lib Dem Podcast here. We are delighted to say that this episode is sponsored by Pray to Reigns. Now more than ever, you need a professional-looking online presence and website. Pray to Reigns have been helping Liberal Democrat campaigns succeed for 18 years. Their Lib Dem Foci package combines a website, social media and email system to help Lib Dems win. You'll receive great support from real people, fair pricing and a huge range of features to choose from. Pray to Reigns are already the bespoke developers for Lighthouse, Lib Dem Draw Online and the LD Directory. They combine a talented system design with an unrivaled understanding of our party, our data and our systems. To find out more, check out the Pray to Reigns website at praytoreigns.co.uk/liberal-democrats. Hello and welcome to the Lib Dem Podcast. Now we have a very, very special guest with us today. Now we've said in the past about some people having lots of jobs within the Lib Dems over their careers. Now this gentleman has had a lot of jobs, from being a staff member, a campaign coordinator. He's been an MP, an MSP, a leader. We're not talking about David, who's also with us today. We are, of course, talking about the wonderful Willie Rennie. Welcome to the podcast, Willie.
Thank you very much, John. I'm looking forward to being grilled by David and yourself.
Yes, or well, we'll go easy. I mean, David, have we decided how easy we're going to go on Willie in this interview? You know, there's a lot to cover.
Hopefully after this I get some kind of job with GB News grilling people, you know.
Now, our production quality is far better than GB News, so you know they won't take on a rival. But I mean, Willie, we'll start off, if you don't mind, just talking a little bit about your views about Afghanistan, because for those that don't know, you were on the Commons Defence Select Committee as well as a spokesman for the Lib Dems when you were in Parliament. So could you give us your thoughts a little bit on the situation?
I actually visited Afghanistan in 2007. We did Pakistan first and then went over into Afghanistan. And the one thing that struck everybody, as I'm sure anybody who's got any experience with Afghanistan, is that it's not very easy. It's a very complex part of the world with ingrained prejudices. And, anybody who thinks that the problem has just really started in the last few weeks, I think, has not been paying attention. When we went to Afghanistan at the time, it was John Reid was the Defence Secretary, and he said, we're going to go into Helmand without a shot being fired. And then hundreds of people died, hundreds of soldiers. I mean, it was a feature at the time that Gordon Brown would start Prime Minister's questions by reading out a list of the dead from that week. It was a really sombre period. So this is a very difficult country to manage. And I think the root of the current problem was with Donald Trump, who astonishingly just gave the Taliban authority above the democratically elected government of the country. And whenever you elevate a force like that to that status, then it is no surprise that the provincial leaders, the tribal leaders across Afghanistan see where the power has shifted. So it was no surprise all those deals were done. And it was no surprise that the Taliban took over just like that as soon as the Americans went. So all of this, was laid at the door of Biden, who have a bit more sympathy for than probably most people do, because I understand the difficult position he was put in. But he should have changed that at the time and started to reverse the damage that had been done by Trump. So I think it's a horrendously complex situation. What we need to do now is, we can look back and see where the mistakes were made, but we also need to look forward to see what do we do now. An awful lot of that is based around diplomacy, but also about the regional players, because Pakistan, India, China, Iran, they've all got significant influences alongside Russia within the country. And we need to make sure that we can make the best of a really difficult situation and make sure that first and foremost, no foreign players like Al-Qaeda start getting into Afghanistan again, and that they are able to try and stabilize the country in whatever way we possibly can, because we cannot go back to the way that we were before. But it's horrendously complex and difficult. And I think the diplomats have got an enormous job to try and recover the damage that's been done, first by Trump, but also by years and years and years of battles in the country.
Thank you, Willie. Thank you. It's an important topic, and for anybody who's listening, obviously we did a podcast episode on the situation in Afghanistan, and it's just tragic to see what's unfolding and how we've kind of let a lot of people down, not only in Afghanistan but globally as well, for the diaspora community as well, that are worried about families, etc. back there. So it's interesting. But Willie, obviously for this episode we wanted to focus on you. And obviously your time as leader of the Scottish Liberal Democrats, and it would be remiss of me not to start off by saying a big thank you to you for taking on such a job for 10 years, or just over 10 years, I think, in what was probably a very difficult period as well for the Scottish Liberal Democrats, and you took that burden on. You did a valiant job. But first of all, obviously you've just recently stepped down. Are you enjoying having some time back? Are you rested and relaxing?
Yeah, I am, and I have to say the biggest change is not having to think about what I'm supposed to think about. It's just, you can watch the news now without thinking, how do I react to this, that, and the other? Now, of course, I'm going to do a bit of that, and I'm going to try and advise Alex and support Alex and generate the lines and the opportunities. But I always felt that I couldn't watch the news without having to think where the chances were and where the responsibilities were. So that's a big change. But anybody who's following Facebook will see that I've not stopped campaigning over the summer. I've been going around various council wards trying to make sure we're ready as much as possible for next year. So if you speak to my wife, you'll find that I don't relax very much, and I'll keep on going. But no, it's just that it's a change, and I think it was time for a change in my mind. And Alex is ready, and he can take it on, and I'll support him in whatever way I can.
Absolutely. And I think it did come slightly as a shock to a lot of Scottish members. You talked there about your energy. You're obviously a very keen runner, and you obviously do your daily update when you're out a run, etc., which we all watched, especially during the election campaign. But when you announced, obviously, you were going to be stepping down as leader, I think a lot of people were shocked. And was it something that you hadn't initially thought, or was it something that was in the back of your mind that you thought, as you said, it is time for a change, and you decided maybe now is the time to do it? To be honest, I constantly thought about it. Not constantly thought about it. I have periodically thought about it for years, because when you're in this job, some people tell you what you want to think. Some people tell you even if you don't want to hear it. And they'll be very brutal. Other people are afraid to tell you the truth about things because they don't want to upset you. Think you've got enough on your plate as it is. So actually getting a proper independent assessment about what's the right thing for the party is quite difficult to do. And so I would constantly just watch, and that's why I took a wee bit of time after the election, just to see how things settled. And just observed people's reactions to what I was doing, and how I felt about facing certain situations, because sometimes it's just the gut that tells you whether you carry on. And it just felt that, going in, when you lose a seat, because we went back, even though we had massive majorities in our own seats, it doesn't matter, we went back. So everybody who's got a particular grievance about the way the party's been managed over the last 10 years now feels fully justified in what they've been saying, even though they all contradict each other. So you're having to push it past those people before you can get to what you really want to do, is to move the party forward. And I've set out a number of things that I think the party should be doing over the last few weeks. So it was just thought, can I go through that again? Or would it just be easier, actually, and best for the party to say, right, well, now is the refreshing point, and you hand over the leadership to somebody else? Because ultimately, I've got to do what's right for myself, but actually, this party means a lot to me. I want it to succeed. And if I think somebody else can do it better than me, I'll pass it on. And I think Alex can do it better than me. So that's why I decided to move on. Yeah.
But obviously, you had a long career in the party before you became the leader of the Scottish Liberal Democrats. And as John rightly touched on at the start, everything through to being a campaigner, towards working for the party, to then being an MP and an MSP. But really what I wanted to understand was what made you decide you wanted to, first of all, get involved in politics and also be a Liberal Democrat?
Yeah, it just felt that natural thing. I didn't sit down and read the stuff. I mean, I like manifestos, but not that much. But it's just one of these things that you felt. I mean, I was brought up in North East Fife, so I had Ming Campbell and the Liberal Democrats around me, so they weren't alien to me. Nationalism at that point was never really a thing that we contemplated. The SNP students at college were a bit of an oddity.
My dad always says when he was younger, people used to think you were a bit weird if you voted nationalist.
Yeah, no, it was. They were strange. And then, student politics was really a divide between the left, and the left. And there wasn't very much else. And then occasionally you would get the Tories popping up. But, and I never had the kind of grievance agenda that was in Labour politics. I actually felt more about uniting the country than I did about them and us. That was never me. I grew up in the 1970s and 80s when there was a lot of industrial strife, and it just wasn't me. So that felt alien to me, and I was never a Tory. For probably exactly the same reasons, because of the grievance agenda. I actually viewed enabling people to do what they want to do was my big thing. I always remember seeing people who I thought, they're left out. Why are they left out? People who had mental health problems, or, even back then you would spot it. People who had physical disabilities that weren't getting a chance. Kids that were my friends at school whose families weren't able to support them properly. And they didn't get a chance to go to university or that. And I always felt, somebody needs to speak for those people, not this kind of class warfare thing, but actually giving people chances. And it was chances. How do you give people an opportunity to do things? And I still meet those people now. And I wish I could have done something for them back then to give them that chance in life. So that's why I always felt that I should be there for the underdog. If somebody was getting bullied at school, I was the one that stepped in and got beat up myself. So it was that kind of thing. I always felt a responsibility, which is why I focus on things like mental health and, special needs, daycare services and stuff like that. That's what really makes me tick. So that's why I got involved. Liberal Democrats seemed the natural place. At the time, it was, Shirley Williams, Roy Jenkins, all those people who were coming up who inspired me. Ming Campbell, obviously, Charles Kennedy a little bit later, David Steele. I was attracted to David Steele. I thought very sensible, reasonable man who proposed quite radical things. I loved his book, what was it, The Militant for the Reasonable Man. I thought that summed me up quite well. Be able to do quite radical things, but to reassure people that it was safe. And David Steele was brilliant at that. So that's why I got involved.
And then obviously we're probably skipping quite over a lot here in terms of what you did within the party, but obviously I think sometimes it gets a little bit lost that you were an MP before you were an MSP. A lot of people maybe don't pick up on that fact because you did have 10 years as the leader of the Scottish Liberal Democrats in the Scottish Parliament. But obviously you came in the by-election victory in 2006 in Dunfermline. Really, what made you decide, first of all, to stand? And did you realise at the time when you stood that there was a real chance that you could potentially pip that election and take the seat?
I always felt Dunfermline was possible. Just because I had done a little bit of work with the councillors down there, and there was a massive big housing estate that had been built on the edge of it, which is basically a suburb of Edinburgh. And I spotted that this was possible. And the party was doing reasonably well. Charles was still kind of leader at that point, although he had just given up before the by-election started. And but it felt right. We just got second place the time before, and getting second place is crucial with these by-elections. And then we had the brilliant Paul Ranger. For those who don't know Paul Ranger, he just a master at by-elections. He made me human to the voters of Dunfermline. He used to get little cartoons of me as Willie made up and stick them in the leaflets. He broke through, and we talked about the bridge, the hospital, the high street, and that's what mattered to people, was the tolls in the bridge, the hospital potentially getting downgraded, the high street being terrible, and we campaigned on issues that people really, really cared about. So I kind of knew that we had the potential to get it, and Labour were in a bit of a state at the time, but Paul Ranger was just a genius. But it was Nicol Stephen that asked me to stand, and I hadn't really thought about that much before then. So Nicol, was the one that spotted, and then he came about 7 times, I think, to help. But it was a brilliant by-election, and there's kind of running joke amongst my friends in the party who every opportunity I get a chance to talk about Dunfermline, it always, because it's such a brilliant campaign. Nobody saw us coming, and we just knocked them out the park. And remember, we had numerous scandals at the time. I love winning from really dodgy odds, but we had numerous scandals. Charles had gone in really difficult circumstances, but then there was a leadership race which fell apart because we had problems with various candidates getting involved in various scandals. And then there was a minute of the Scottish MPs meeting that was left on a photocopier somewhere. And it declared that Willie was going to struggle to hold on to second place. Right? So all these things were like weighed against us. But what we did, and this is a salutary lesson for people, when they think everything is against them, just go knock on some doors. Because it just sobers you up. It makes you realise that people are not really bothered about all that puff. So we knocked on some doors in Inverkeithing, and there was 2 people mentioned it. One laughed at, one I discovered later on was always rude to everybody who came to the door. But the other one just laughed with us. And the vote in the rest of the estate, which is just an ordinary estate, was big. So it's a lesson for people. Just keep pursuing it and knock on the doors to find out what people are really thinking, because that's the way to find out if you've got a chance or not. Sorry, I'm talking too much.
No. We've made this point a lot, about when you're inside the political bubble, you don't realise that 99% of the population isn't. And you might think it's an absolute scandal or a huge story. How can anyone vote for me? And most people haven't even heard of it, let alone made a judgment on it.
We were on the front page of the Sunday newspapers that day, every single front page. And I knocked in the afternoon of that day on the doors, and 2 people mentioned it, and one was already with us. So, I mean, yeah. So you're absolutely right, John. It's overstated in the bubble. And it's the best thing to do is get out and tell people that you've gone out, and tell people what happened when you were out. And that gets them out as well, and then you're rolling again.
And I think there was, people tend to forget as well at the time, Labour put out a big gun in Catherine Stiller, who was the incumbent MEP for Scotland. And there was a lot of, I don't want to say arrogance of saving the seat, but there was definitely a view of like, this is a safe seat and we don't really need to worry about it. And then, as you've rightly said, Willie, just get out and continually knock doors, and you never know how these things can turn. And we've seen that recently as well with by-elections down south, where we've had fantastic victories, and the incumbent party might have been a bit naive in thinking that there was no problems.
But it also tells you, I think it told you a little bit about what was to come for the Labour Party. We discovered during the independence referendum campaign in 2014 just how poor a state the organisational Labour Party was. There was hardly any canvassability across the country, very few canvassers. And I think, because we used to see the spreadsheets during the independence campaign about who was doing what where, they were doing nothing. And that was a sign there of what was to come. The SNP managed to exploit that opportunity later. People were fed, we forget in Scotland, people were really fed up with the dominance of Labour for decades. They said they take us for granted. They assume they're going to win, and therefore they don't have to do anything. And when you don't have to do anything, you don't bother knocking on doors. And that's that. I think it was a kind of a warning for the Labour Party of what was about to come with the SNP rise. We got in there first, but it's. I think it could, we could easily have exploited it elsewhere, but the SNP managed to get there first.
Yeah, and I think you're right, though, because, I found this for a long time being a Labour Party organiser, that trying to get activists out to campaign was the hardest part of my job, because I think people just assumed, we don't need to, it's in the bag here, it's safe, blah, blah, blah. And these things, it's like a dripping tap, it does a lot of damage over a period of time. And if you don't stem it, then it becomes a problem.
And there was, I remember speaking to, because I used to talk to the Labour MPs when I was in Westminster, and I say, so what are you up to this weekend, Ian? And he said, I said, I'm going canvassing. And he looked at me as if I was alien. I said, what would I do that for? He said, and this was typical of a lot of them, particularly the West of Scotland ones. They were just so arrogant. They had assumed they got it in the bag and they didn't bother doing anything. And the SNP just, first puff of wind, it fell over. I think so. That was a warning of what was to come. But Dunfermline was great. I loved the place. In fact, I probably got a bit too attached to the place. And when I lost in 2010, it was tough, really tough.
And that must have been especially tough in the fact that, in 2010, and I know we might touch on the coalition because you obviously went into the Scottish Parliament. It must have been tough in the aspect of you lose your seat and the party's just got in a position where it can enter government. Was that a personal disappointment? Did you think there was a chance you could have held it?
I thought I had held it about 3 weeks beforehand. I thought I was going to coast it 3 weeks. And I'll tell you about my theory. It's probably not based on any fact, really. I managed to get a coalition of voters in Dunfermline that didn't really care what was happening in national politics. They just wanted to back me to do a good job locally. They were fed up with Labour for years. They backed me locally. But they were all way from the left to the right. It was like a huge spectrum of people who would vote. And if they all met each other in a room, they'd be horrified. But so I got them. But as soon as Nick Clegg became a big thing in the campaign and potentially directing the future of the national government, then that coalition fell apart. And, there would be some people who they didn't like him, and therefore that became a bigger thing than my reputation in Dunfermline. I mean, I had ratings in Dunfermline that were as good as Gordon Brown's, and considering he was the next door MP, I think that was astonishing that we managed to achieve that, but it didn't matter a jot when it came to that pressure. The Labour Party just exploited the fact that we potentially could do a deal with the Tories. And the fact that it potentially could happen, no matter what I said, was enough for those people who were soft Labour who came to me to say, nah, we're off. And it just collapsed. You could feel it. I did One Street, Headwell Road in Dunfermline. And I did it 3 weeks out and then the last weekend. And the vote must have dropped by about 2/3 in the space of 2 weeks. Just astonishing. And it was all because the national campaign became much more relevant, and therefore their views about that mattered, and therefore they weren't going to back me if they didn't agree. So you could feel it just wilting away. So yeah, I was actually more disappointed about not being able to hold the seat than I was about the opportunity of me being at Westminster at the time. That mattered less, to be honest. It was about, I wanted to be the MP for Dunfermline, and I was disappointed I didn't hold on.
Yeah. And then obviously, unfortunately you didn't hold the seat, but then the opportunity comes round a year later to run for the Scottish Parliament, and obviously you were elected. And this is kind of a two-part question, because first of all, I wanted to understand what your thoughts were on Holyrood versus Westminster and sort of the change that was going from being an MP to an MSP. And I won't name names, but I've heard people that have done both jobs that have said Westminster's a lot more full-on than maybe Holyrood might be. And the other part was really, obviously, you come into the Scottish Parliament and then you become leader of the Scottish Liberal Democrats. Was that really ever on the radar, or was it something you felt that, okay, I'm here and I have to put my name forward for this?
First of all, let me deal with Westminster Holyrood. They're different beasts. Westminster does the big thing better, the big occasion, the big event, and it's a much more, people put their political badges aside at Westminster when the chips are down. The whole Afghanistan thing is an example of that, where, the kind of party divide is broken down and people just actually speak from the heart because it really matters. And the committees are better.
The committee reports are much more authoritative for that. I was on the Defence Committee for a bit, and I thought they produced some excellent reports, which weren't, even though they were dominated by Labour MPs, they weren't, pro-government. They were actually looking at the issue and making a judgment on the issue very effectively. I think Holyrood there's a little bit less stuffiness, but it's just as abusive. I don't think it's just as noisy. Being surrounded by nationalist MSPs on all sides and trying to ask Nicola a question that they don't like is not the easiest thing in the world. So I think, and obviously Holyrood is much more relevant to the things that I really care about, health and social care and education and so on. So it was odd being at Westminster where quite a lot of the agenda wasn't relevant to constituents. So there's bits of Holyrood I like and bits of Westminster I liked. I think there's this idea that the Scottish Parliament's got it all right is just not the case. The committees could be so much better. And I think that kind of conceit probably needs to be pricked a little bit, because I don't think they're as good as they think they are. So did I think I was going to be leader? I kind of felt it, that it was probably going to happen, because I knew that Tavish would probably stand down, because we knew the election was going to be a bad one. And I'm not really sure anybody else wanted it, if I'm being blunt. And I had been chief executive of the Scottish Party before, so I had done a kind of leadership thing. I'd been at Westminster, so I knew them. And that was always a problem before, about the divide between MSPs and MPs in the party. Just the same as within the Labour Party, there was a big divide between the two. And I think I was able to cross that because I'd been in both places. I didn't have that view about one was superior to the other. So that worked pretty well. And having worked with ministers directly, Danny Alexander and Michael Moore and so on, and I knew obviously Nick Clegg, because I was part of his campaign team in 2006, 7, 8. So I knew all the players, which helped a bit. So it just fell to me. I mean, Alison McInnes and I had a good chat. Alison McInnes is a massive loss to the Scottish Parliament, and I still regret the fact that we didn't manage to keep her, because she was such a great individual. But she and I had a chat about, because she was particularly keen for the new young man who had just joined the group not to assume that he was going to be in charge, and she was absolutely right. So it was a natural kind of thing to do, and I enjoyed it. Being able to work on the coalition was intellectually stimulating, let's say, if not always a tremendously great experience. But being able to have a degree of influence over what was happening with the UK government on certain things was great. I remember meeting Ian Duncan Smith in a hotel in Edinburgh and trying to persuade him to dump the bedroom tax.
How did that go?
He was a strange individual. He was basically saying he said, Willie, when we changed it in London, he said, when they put that cap on the amount of, so when we changed it there, he said, people found a way of paying for it. And then he said, the black market's alive and well. And I said, so what you're basically saying, Ian, is that people should break the law in order to pay your taxes. That was basically what he was saying. And it was astonishing. So anyway, thankfully, I actually managed to negotiate with Danny Alexander to lift the cap on the discretionary housing allowance, which effectively led to the abolition of the bedroom tax in Scotland. I never shouted about it, but those are the kind of things that you could do. It's a small thing. It didn't get rid of the bedroom tax altogether, and we're still having to deal with it in England and elsewhere, but it actually being able to influence at that time was quite an important thing from my point of view. So you get chances to do those kind of things, as well as we used to pick certain issues, so like childcare, mental health services, issues around about the police Scotland. We would be the go-to guys, as I would call it, on those certain issues, and we would change government policy. We managed to get 2-year-olds, the 15 hours now, 30 hours of childcare, which Alex Salmond was deadly opposed to. Deadly opposed. He kept going on about family nurse partnerships as being the route to do it. And we won the argument in the end. He gave in. Mental health services, we got massive amounts more money for that, and it's given it the priority it needs just by plugging away on those things. So we had as much influence as the Labour Party or the Tory Party over government policy because we held the balance of power in many cases. And we were able to work with the government by just, in sheer persistence, managed to change their view. So those things will always be important to me, that we managed to achieve those things. But yeah, there was difficult times too.
Well, talking about difficult times, obviously you come in 2011, 2014 we have the referendum, and then ever since 2014, well, probably before 2014, the conversation has just been dominated by one issue in Scotland, which is obviously the independence question. How difficult has it been, I guess, for yourself when you were the leader, but also for the party during that period to try and cut through with a message that isn't somehow tied to that or doesn't eventually lead back to that rhetoric?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a challenge. It's why I did a huge amount. A lot in the party don't think I did an awful lot in federalism, but I did a huge amount in federalism. And we managed to basically bounce the Tories into supporting more powers for the Scottish Parliament when they did not want to do anything. We managed to get the £2.5 billion welfare budget. We managed to get the powers over tax, VAT assignment. That was all done because of the work that I did and others in the party did, Robert Brown, Mine Campbell, other people like that. And we managed to change it. So now the Scottish Parliament raises the majority of the money it spends. And that was an important principle to try and establish. So we had a bit of an edge on more powers, and we managed to change, obviously, how the Scottish Parliament works as a result of that. When it's a binary question, though, and the Tories are always going to, if you've got unionist in the name, people think you're maybe a bit more committed to it than they actually are, because they're the ones that are doing the damage to the union more than anybody else, because that's why people vote for, in many cases, the SNP and independents, because they want to get rid of the Tories forever. They think that's the way to do it. It's not, but that's what they think. And the Tories are actually doing more damage to the United Kingdom than they actually think they are. Which is why we rejected Douglas Ross's stupid idea of having this pan-unionist alliance during the election. If you want to persuade these people who are on the anti-Tory centre left, and they're tempted by independence, if you want to persuade them back, you don't do it by joining up with the Tories, the very people that they don't like. It's just completely illogical. I'm appealing to those people. Annis appealed to those people. And we need to do an awful lot to try and attract those people back. If we just consolidate the ever-decreasing amount of votes we're going to get for the United Kingdom, we're on the way out. So let's start addressing the real challenges, the fears that people have got about the future of the United Kingdom, about what kind of country it actually is and should be in the future. I feel quite strongly about these things.
No, but you're almost in a permanent squeeze position here, where you've got such incompetence down in Westminster that you're almost having to fight that battle as well as the battle for principles for what you actually stand for. And so you're permanently getting that squeeze on either side of you. And so how then do you break that going forward?
Well, you do it by, you've got to have an answer around the Constitution. That's why you've got to be clear. I believe in the United Kingdom, full stop. I also believe in reforming the United Kingdom, full stop. That will persuade some people to come back. I actually believe the best way to persuade them to come back is to convince them there is an alternative Scotland and the United Kingdom that there could be. And that is involved in the whole social agenda. It's about equality. It's about investing in the NHS and education, getting the Scottish education system back up to where it should be, to make sure we've got an NHS that can treat people much more quickly than just now. Things that matter in people's daily lives. That's how you persuade those people on that independence curious section of the public to come back and don't support independence, because independence will undermine those very things that I've just talked about. So that's what we've got to do. And that's what I've tried to do by focusing on mental health and early education and all those things. That's what we need to do. And the Tories are just not helping.
The Tories are making it, who would be surprised? The Tories are making it worse. Douglas Ross is the worst advert for the United Kingdom. Boris Johnson is just breaking it in the way that he operates. And that's why, but it's not done. There's a massive job. I mean, if the SNP can't get, above 50%, when Boris Johnson's in charge, we've had this Afghanistan situation, we've had Brexit, we've had all these calamities going on. His handling of the pandemic was appalling up until the vaccine. If all those things are happening and you can't get above 50% on independence, what are they going to do to get above? So it's not lost by any means, but come on, we need to get our act together.
It'd be interesting, Willie, just to get some thoughts on, obviously, in the news recently, they've announced that will potentially, obviously still to be formalised, be a coalition or something like a coalition between the SNP and the Greens. And obviously, I stood against Patrick Harvey in the Scottish Parliament elections. If I'm frank, I really don't know, based off the debates I had, where his policies differ from the SNP. It was all the same, and I tried to point that out. But what do you think that means for Scotland in the next term of the Scottish Parliament? And I guess, how dangerous might that be, bringing these people into the fold that are just wanting independence at any cost?
Yeah, I kind of get... The thing that disturbs me most about the politics of Patrick Harvey's Greens, because I think a lot of the Greens are not like this, but it's the tone. It's very aggressive. And they present themselves as cuddly, but they're far from it. A lot of their language is, I think, very divisive. And I think Nicola will find that hard. I think she'll find that hard to handle. I won't go into the issues, but on a whole range of issues. I think the failure to understand about what a just transition actually is, that you can do tokenistic changes on things that look good, but actually don't deal with the climate emergency one little bit. You've actually got to deal with the demand in Scotland on transport and housing. That's the big opportunity. So I'm not sure that Patrick and his team have really got the answers, but he's also, the tone of it is, I think, very divisive. It's, the way he speaks. I mean, I don't like the Conservatives, but the way he speaks about the Conservatives, it's like they're aliens. And I think we just got to be a bit more respect in politics for the way that we treat each other. And I just don't think that helps. So I think Nicola will find it hard. And he's obviously trying to be on the inside, but not be on the inside. But it's a shared agenda, it says it. So if things go wrong, he's responsible. Responsible as anybody else in the government. So if he tries to have slopey shoulders and get out of this, then I think the voters will view it differently. You've got to face up. And even if he's got areas where we agree to disagree, as it's in the programme, the fact that you're allowing the SNP to do what they want on the areas that you disagree is not agreeing to disagree. It's not like putting it to one side and doing nothing about it. The SNP are able to move ahead with their agenda on all these things, and the Greens can do nothing about it. They've abdicated the responsibility to try and influence them. So I think there's a lot of fundamental flaws in the way they've set it up, which I think will come back to bite them. But we've got to allow them to have a go at it. I mean, they won the election. Between them, they've got the mandate in terms of delivering their agenda. I don't think they've got a clear mandate on independence because Nicola softened it in the weeks before the election because she knew it was a loser. But I think they will try and push it forward on independence. I think it's a really tricky one because I can't see Boris agreeing to a referendum, and I don't know what she does if he says no.
It does. I mean, the thing that I find ridiculous about the whole setup is, as you rightly said, this sort of we're in, but we're not in, and we're holding people to account, but we're also part of it. And, I likened it to, if you've ever seen the Woody Allen film Bananas, where he cross-examines himself in court and he runs between the box and being the lawyer. And I said, that's kind of what we're seeing here, right? Where Patrick Harvey's part of it, but he's also cross-examining himself. So I don't really see how it all works. But getting back to, reflecting on your 10 years as leader, I think most people probably know, and actually maybe a lot of our viewers and listeners down south might not know this, but you were actually voted one of the most recognisable leaders that people knew of in Scotland Obviously known for a lot of your big stunts that you did that got a lot of coverage in the press. And if we could just touch on kind of reflecting on your 10 years as leader, what are the things you're most proud of? And also what really kind of, I guess, started off the whole craze of Willie Rennie stunts?
So the things I'm most proud of is mental health and early education. Those are two things. We changed that. I think the third thing is we've managed to keep the Liberal Democrats alive. We've managed to keep it as a credible political force in Scotland, which was not always certain. We've got 4, I think, excellent members of Parliament. Wendy in particular, in my own constituency, I'm particularly delighted about because she's a class act. But Jamie and Christine and Alistair are also great advocates for the party. So we've managed to get a team of people, gender balanced team of people. That's another area that I worked on a lot. So those are things I'm particularly pleased with. And a good team in the Scottish Parliament with whopping big majorities. I mean, I try not to say it too often, but Alex Cole-Hamilton is the most popular MSP there has ever been in the Scottish Parliament, which is not a good thing for him. But you don't get that kind of vote unless you're doing something right. We just need to spread that a bit more across the country. So in terms of the photo ops, it was all completely cynical. It was all partly because I like having a bit of fun with things. An election should be fun, but it was to cut through. And if just one person comes up to me in the street and asks me about a photo opportunity, something that I've done that